Don't make this awkward, Ruth. The checks stop. The seat stays empty. That's the deal. My sister-in-law said it the way you'd cancel a magazine subscription. Across the table, my brother-in-law set his coffee cup down without a sound. And for the first time in 9 years, it stayed down. Nobody at that table knew what I knew. That at 7:42 the next morning, every automatic transfer with my name on it would expire. The mortgage, the tuition, the medical line of credit nobody admitted existed. 11 years. $341,612. A woman who just pushed paper for the government had been the quiet machine under their whole comfortable life, and not one of them had ever once said the word thank you. I waited for the anger to come. It didn't. What came instead settled low in my chest, the way a heavy pack settles after you've carried it too far to feel the straps anymore. You stop noticing the weight and start noticing that you've stopped noticing. That was the last family dinner I attended as the woman they thought I was. To understand the look on Wesley's face 3 weeks later, when a lawyer slid one page across a mahogany table and the room went very, very still, you have to go back to a cheap diner outside Fort Stewart and a promise I made to a dying man. His name was Caleb Calloway. He was my husband, and he was the reason I learned to carry things without telling anybody I was carrying them. We met in 1989, both of us privates. Both of us too young to know how rare it was to find a person who could sit in silence with you and not feel the need to fill it. Caleb was the kind of soldier who fixed things: radios, trucks, people. He could splice a wire blindfolded and talk a homesick 18-year-old out of doing something stupid in the same hour. I was logistics. Supply. The part of the army that nobody writes movies about, because making sure 40,000 meals and the right blood type and the correct boots in the correct sizes arrive at the correct place on the correct day is not cinematic. It is just the difference between an army that functions and a pile of brave people who starve. People used to say that to me, like it was a compliment with a hook in it. Oh, you're a paper pusher, as though the paper pushed itself, as though the people who eat because of the paper would survive the paper's absence. I never argued. Caleb taught me that too. He used to say the loudest person in the room is almost never the one holding it up. We married in 1992 in a courthouse in Hinesville, Georgia, with 2 witnesses we'd grabbed from the hallway, and a justice of peace who smelled like cough drops. I wore a dress I'd bought off a clearance rack, and Caleb wore his Class A's because it was the only thing he owned that didn't have an oil stain. We had $90 between us, and we spent $40 of it on the marriage license, and most of the rest on a tank of gas and a motel by the highway with a pool nobody swam in. I have never in my life been happier than I was that weekend, and I've had some good weekends since. People assume a marriage like ours was hard because of the deployments, and the deployments were hard, but that's not what made it. What made it was the in-between. The way Caleb would come home from a 14-hour day, and instead of collapsing, he'd go next door and help our neighbor, a Vietnam vet named Doyle who had nobody, get his garbage cans to the curb because Doyle's hands shook too bad to manage the lids. Every Tuesday. For 9 years. Doyle never said thank you either. He was too far gone for thank yous, and Caleb never wanted one. I asked him once why he kept doing it when Doyle didn't even seem to register it. Registering it's not the job, he said. The cans being at the curb is the job. I think about that sentence more than almost anything anyone's ever said to me. The cans being at the curb is the job, not the thanks. Not the noticing. The cans at the curb. Caleb's family came to the courthouse reception, which was at a barbecue place with paper towels on the tables and a sign that said the bathroom was for customers only. His mother, Loretta, cried and called me the soldier girl for the first year before she learned my name. His younger brother, Wesley, was 17 then, all elbows and attitude, and he spent the whole party telling anyone who'd listen that he was going to be rich someday and wouldn't be caught dead playing soldier for government wages. He said it loud enough for me to hear. I think he wanted me to hear. Caleb just laughed. Get there however you get there, little brother, he said. Just don't forget who carried you on the way. Wesley did forget. That's most of this story. Caleb deployed to the Gulf, came home, deployed again later to a place I'm not allowed to name even now. Somewhere in the second one, his liver started to fail. A slow thing, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that you mistake for being tired until a doctor says a word you have to ask him to spell. He was 44. We had been married long enough that I'd stopped imagining a version of my life without him in it. The last clear conversation we had, he was in a hospital bed at the VA in Charleston, hooked to things that beeped, and he held my hand with the grip of a man who used to bench 300 pounds and now couldn't open a juice cup. "They're going to need you," he said. I knew who he meant: his mother, Loretta, his brother Wesley, who by then had a wife and a house with a mortgage 2 sizes too big, and a habit of buying his way out of every problem until the problems got bigger than the buying. "They don't even like me, Caleb." "That's not the point." He smiled, and it cost him something. "You don't take care of people because they earned it. You take care of them because somebody has to, and you're the one who knows how." He squeezed, weak as it was. "Promise me you won't let them go under, quietly, so they keep their pride." "Pride's all some people have, Ruthie," I promised. You don't argue with a man who's spending his last good words on other people. He died on a Tuesday in March. The funeral had full honors: the flag, the rifle volley, the bugle. A young sergeant I'd never met knelt in front of me and handed me a triangle of folded cloth and said the words, "On behalf of a grateful nation." And I want to tell you I heard them. But mostly I heard the gap where Caleb's laugh should have been. His family sat in the row behind me. Loretta cried, which I respected. Wesley spent the reception on his phone, closing a deal. His wife Brooke. They'd been married a year, kept checking her reflection in the window of the funeral home, like she was worried grief was making her look tired. I went home to a quiet house and a folded flag and a promise, and then I kept it. For 11 years, without telling a single one of them. Here is the part people find hard to believe, so let me be specific, because the specifics are the whole point. I had retired by then. 26 years, a lieutenant colonel's pension, a settlement from Caleb's service-connected illness, and the careful, boring savings habits of 2 people who'd grown up without money and never trusted having it. I was not rich. I want to be clear about that. I drove a 2009 Camry with 190,000 miles on it and a cup holder I'd fixed twice with epoxy. I clipped coupons. Not because I had to anymore, but because the woman who learned to clip them at 9 years old never fully leaves you. But I had enough. And the Calloways did not. It started small. 6 months after the funeral, Loretta's roof failed during a storm, and she didn't have the $4,000 to fix it, and was too proud to say so. I found out because Wesley mentioned. I found out because at a Sunday dinner I'd been guilted into attending that Mom's dealing with some house stuff, and the way he said it told me he wasn't going to handle it. He had the money. He had the bigger house, the boat, the watch. He just didn't have the instinct. So I called a contractor. I told him to bill me directly and tell Loretta the manufacturer had a recall warranty that covered it. He thought that was strange. I told him I'd pay an extra $200 for him to think it was strange quietly. He did the work. Loretta got her roof. She told the whole family about the lucky recall for years. That's how it works, by the way. That's how you carry someone without breaking their pride. You build a small lie that lets them keep their dignity. And you eat the cost of the lie, and you never, ever take the credit. The credit is the thing that turns help into a debt. The moment they know, they owe you, and the owing poisons everything. Caleb understood that. He'd done it for half his unit over the years, and none of them ever knew. Before I tell you how it became a system, I have to introduce you to one other person, because he matters at the end, and a story should plant the things it's going to need. His name was Earl Tuck. He'd been a master sergeant in the same logistics world Caleb and I came up in. Supply, transport, the unglamorous machinery, and he'd retired to a double-wide outside Hinesville with a bad hip and a better dog. Earl had known Caleb for 30 years. He'd been at our courthouse wedding, one of the 2 strangers we'd grabbed from the hallway, except he wasn't a stranger. He'd just happened to be there renewing a license. And Caleb had recognized him and pulled him in. That's the kind of thing Caleb did. Made witnesses out of whoever was standing nearby. After Caleb died, Earl was the one who actually checked on me, not the family. Earl. He'd call on the 1st of the month every month, and he wouldn't say much. Supply people aren't talkers. He'd just ask if the truck still ran and if I was eating and whether I needed anything moved. I never did. But the asking was the thing. It was Earl who first noticed what I was doing, years before anyone else. Because Earl noticed inventory the way other people notice weather. He'd see the contractor's truck at Loretta's. He'd hear the word recall and do the math. Because a man who spent 30 years tracking where things actually came from does not believe in lucky recalls. One afternoon on my porch, he set his sweet tea down and said, "You're floating them. The whole bunch of them, aren't you?" I didn't answer, and they don't know. I didn't answer that either. Earl looked out at the road for a while. Then he said the thing I've carried longer than almost anything anybody's ever said to me. Caleb did that for half the company. Paid a man's child support out of his own pocket for 2 years once, told the fella the unit had a hardship fund. There wasn't any fund. There was just Caleb. He picked his tea back up. You married the right man and you're the right kind of fool. I'm not going to tell you to stop. I'm going to tell you to write it down. Everything. Date and dollar. Because someday somebody's going to need to know the truth, and the only thing worse than a thankless good deed is a thankless good deed nobody can prove. That's where the green ledger came from. Earl Tuck. A master sergeant's instinct, which is that love is fine top but documentation is forever. I want you to remember Earl. Set him on the shelf in your mind. We'll come back for him. After the roof, it became a system. Wesley's business. He sold high-end home theater installations to people richer than he'd ever be. Went through a bad stretch in 2015. He'd over-leveraged. Expanded into a second showroom right before the market for $60,000 speaker rooms cooled. And he was 3 months behind on the showroom lease, with a wife who liked nice things and a teenager he was determined to send to a private school that cost more per year than I made in 2. He never asked me for help. He would have rather lost the house than ask the paper pusher widow for help. So I didn't make him ask. I knew his accountant. Small town, Georgia, everyone knows everyone. And his accountant, a decent man named Harold Pruitt, had been Caleb's accountant too. I sat down with Harold and we built something. I want you to understand it was legal, it was careful, and it was completely invisible. I set up a private grantor trust, a legal instrument, the kind estate lawyers use every single day, and I funded it, and through it I quietly covered the gaps. The showroom lease got paid through what Wesley believed was as a deferred payment program his landlord offered. The tuition got covered by a veteran's family scholarship that Wesley never questioned because believing in free money is easier than believing your dead brother's widow is bailing you out. The medical bills. And there were medical bills because Brooke had a scare in 2018 that ran to almost $80,000 after the insurance fought every line, got absorbed into a hospital charity adjustment that Harold and I engineered through a real charitable mechanism that hospitals actually have, except the funding came from me. 11 years. $341,612. There was one rescue I'll tell you about in detail, because it's the one that shows you exactly what kind of man as Wesley was, and exactly what kind of help I was giving, and the gap between the two. In 2017, the IRS came for him. Not for fraud, Wesley wasn't a crook, just careless, which in the end does about the same damage at a slower speed. He'd misclassified 2 years of his installers as contractors instead of employees to dodge payroll taxes. The way a lot of small businesses do until the day it catches up with them, and it caught up with him to the tune of $61,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. He got the letter on a Thursday. By Saturday, he was at Sunday dinner volume about how the government was a parasite, how they punish the men who build things, how nobody appreciates a job creator. Performing his outrage for an audience that included me, the retired government employee, the parasite's foot soldier, sitting in my wobbly chair eating his wife's dry pot roast and saying nothing. He had no idea I was going to fix it. He'd have rather gone to prison than know. I went to Harold. We couldn't make a tax bill vanish. The IRS is the one institution in America you cannot quietly trust your way around, but we could do the next thing. I funded a settlement through the trust, structured as a loan from a small business relief fund that Harold presented to Wesley as a program Wesley qualified for through his Chamber of Commerce membership. Wesley signed the papers without reading them, the way he did everything, complaining the whole time about how at least somebody finally did something for the little guy. The loan had a forgiveness clause buried on page 4 that would quietly zero it out over 5 years of him simply staying current on taxes he didn't know I'd already paid. He bragged about that loan for a year, told people he'd negotiated with the IRS, told Tyler it was a lesson in standing up to bullies. I sat there and let him have it. That was the deal I'd made with Caleb's memory. Let him keep the story where he's the hero. Eat the cost of the lie. Never take the credit. But I'll be honest with you, because we're past the point of pretending. That was the night the resentment first got a foothold in me. Not because he didn't thank me. He couldn't thank me. He didn't know. Because of the contempt. Because the man whose tax bill I was paying spent the dinner I paid for, in the house I was propping up, lecturing the table about how government workers were leeches on the productive class. And I had to nod. I had to pass the potatoes. I had to be the woman in the wobbly chair while the man I was carrying stood on my back to reach a little higher and called me dead weight. Earl, when I told him, didn't say much. He just said, "There's a kind of help that helps the person, and a kind that helps the lie they tell about themselves. Be careful you're not paying to keep the lie alive." I told him I was keeping a promise. He said, "Caleb asked you to keep them off the street. He didn't ask you to be their footstool. You added the footstool yourself, Ruthie, and you're going to want to look at why someday." I didn't look at it. Not for years. I was too busy carrying. Not because I planned to collect. I want to be clear. I never once planned to collect. But because Caleb raised me on the idea that don't get to be sloppy just because you're being kind. Kindness without records is just chaos that feels good. I had a ledger, a real paper one, a green accountant's book, because I don't trust the cloud with the things that matter. Every entry in my handwriting, every lie I told to protect their pride, logged next to the cost of telling it. You'd think 11 years of this would buy a person some basic decency at the dinner table. It bought me a folding chair at the end, the one with the wobbly leg, and a steady drip of small humiliation served with the green beans. Brooke had a particular talent for it. She never raised her voice. That wasn't her style. Her style was the comment that sounded like a compliment until you turned it over. "Ruth, you're so brave to still wear that haircut." Most women our age soften it up. "Ruth, it must be such a relief to not have to keep up with fashion. The military really does free you from all that." "Ruth, we should get you on one of those dating apps. Even at your age, somebody might want a, low-maintenance type." Wesley let it happen. That was the part that took me the longest to forgive, and the part I'm not sure I ever fully did. He'd inherited his brother's face, the same heavy brow, the same way of going quiet, but none of the spine behind it. When Brooke went after me, he'd find something fascinating in his plate. Once, exactly once, I saw him open his mouth like he might say something, and Brooke put her hand on his arm and he closed it again. A grown man silenced by a hand on the arm. Loretta was kinder, in the vague way of someone who'd decided long ago not to see things that would require her to act. She liked me well enough. She just liked peace more, and peace in that family meant Brooke got her way. The teenager grew up. His name was Tyler, and somewhere around 16 he started looking at me with the open contempt that kids inherit from their parents like a hand-me-down coat. He didn't know I'd paid for his school. He thought I was the sad old aunt who showed up to dinners in the same 2 cardigans and didn't have anything interesting to say. To be fair to him, I never gave him a reason to think otherwise. That was the whole design. I'd sit at the end of the table in my wobbly chair, and I'd watch this family that I was secretly holding above water treat me like the help, and I'd think about Caleb, and I'd think, this is the promise. Nobody said the promise would feel good. Here's what finally cracked it. It wasn't the cruelty. I'd built up a tolerance to the cruelty, the way you build up a callus. It was Loretta's stroke. She had it in the spring, a bad one, and she came out of it needing full-time care, the kind that costs $9,000 a month and bankrupts families faster than almost anything in America. Wesley, of course, didn't have it. 11 years of me quietly fixing his foundations had let him keep living one expensive tier above what he could actually afford, which meant when a real catastrophe hit, there was no cushion. Because I was the cushion, and the cushion was invisible. So I started paying for Loretta's care. Another $4,000 a month on top of everything else. I sold the Camry's twin, Caleb's old truck, which I'd kept in the garage for 11 years and started exactly once a month just to hear it run, to free up cash, and I cried doing it, and then I wrote the check. And that was the spring Brooke decided I was a problem. Because here is the thing about being the invisible support. The better you do it, the more it looks like the family is simply thriving on its own. 11 years of seamless rescue had taught Brooke that the money just appeared. Roofs got recalled. Scholarships materialized. Hospitals forgave debts. The universe, in Brooke's understanding, simply provided for people like them, people of quality, and the only stubborn flaw in her otherwise pleasant life was this dowdy widow who kept showing up to dinners and reminding everyone, with her very presence, of the brother-in-law nobody liked to think about because thinking about him meant thinking about death, and death was not on brand. So at the dinner, the one I started with, Brooke decided to fix the flaw. It was Loretta's birthday, technically, though Loretta was in the memory care facility I was paying for and couldn't attend her own party. They held it anyway at Wesley's house, the big one with the foyer that echoed. 12 people. Brooke's friends, mostly, the kind who say we should do this more often and never do. I was there because I was always there. Because I'd promised a dying man. Brooke waited until the dessert plates were down. She has a sense of theater, I'll give her that. The cake was a sheet cake. From Dempsey's, the good bakery, the one I'd actually paid for. Though Brooke had ordered it, and so in the room's understanding, it was Brooke's generosity on the table. There were 12 people. I knew maybe 3 of them. The rest were Brooke's, a realtor, and her husband, a woman who sold essential oils and talked about her team, a couple Wesley golfed with. They'd been drinking the kind of wine that costs enough to mention, and somebody had mentioned it twice. I'd brought a card for Loretta and a small wrapped thing, a soft throw blanket in the dusty rose she used to like, the color of a dress she'd worn in a photograph from before any of us were born. I'd planned to drop it at Wisteria Gardens on my way home. It sat by my plate the whole dinner. Nobody asked what it was. Ruth, Brooke said in the bright voice. Wesley and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to, give you some space. I didn't understand at first. Space, from the family obligations, the dinners, the holidays. You've been so loyal, all these years, and honestly it's a lot to ask of you, isn't it? At your stage of life. She smiled at her friends, sharing the joke they couldn't quite see yet. We'd hate for you to feel you have to keep showing up out of duty. To Caleb's memory, I mean. It's been, 11 years? Even the army gives people leave. The table laughed, uncertain, following her lead. I looked at Wesley. I gave him one chance. One. I held his eyes and I waited for the man whose tuition I'd paid, whose business I'd saved, whose tax bill I'd quietly absorbed while he called my whole profession a parasite, whose mother I was keeping alive in a clean bed across town with a garden view, to say a single word in my defense. I want you to understand what I was asking for, in that look, not gratitude. He couldn't give gratitude for things he didn't know about. I was asking for the smaller thing, the thing that didn't require any secret knowledge at all, basic decency. The thing you do for any person, of any speed, who has sat at your table for 11 years. I was asking him to be, for 2 seconds, his brother's brother. He looked at his plate. He found something fascinating in the frosting, and Brooke, mistaking my silence for surrender, leaned in for the part she'd clearly rehearsed. Don't make this awkward, Ruth. The checks stop. The seat stays empty. That's the deal. She didn't even know there were checks. She meant the metaphorical checks, the obligation, the showing up. She had no idea she was reciting, almost word for word, a financial reality she knew nothing about. We just think it's healthier for everyone if you found your own people. People your own speed. Across the table, Wesley set his coffee cup down without a sound, and it stayed down. I want to tell you I felt rage. The story would be cleaner if I'd felt rage. What I felt was the weight going. 11 years of a pack I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was a choice. Brooke thought she was throwing me out. She was unbuckling the straps. All right, I said. That was it. 2 words. I folded my napkin, set it beside my untouched cake, and I stood up. At 54, with a knee that clicks and a hand that doesn't fully close, I stood up out of a wobbly chair in a foyer that echoed. And I picked up my purse, and I walked toward the door. Ruth, don't be dramatic. Brooke called after me, delighted. We can still send a card at Christmas. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around all the way. Just my head, just enough. You'll want to call Harold Pruitt in the morning, I said. Before 9, if you can manage it. Who? Your accountant. He's going to have some questions for you. About the recall, and the scholarship, and the charity adjustment, and the deferred lease. I let each word land. I'd waited 11 years. I could spare 4 seconds per word. And about Loretta's room at Wisteria Gardens. The nice one, on the south side, with the garden view. That's a private pay room, Brooke. $9,000 a month. You might want to ask Harold who's been paying for it. The foyer had gone the specific kind of quiet that isn't the absence of sound but the presence of attention. Brooke laughed, but it had a crack in it now. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that at 7:42 tomorrow morning, 11 years of automatic transfers are going to stop. I looked at Wesley then, only at Wesley, the way Caleb used to look at him. I made a promise to your brother that I'd never let you go under, and that I'd never tell you I was the one keeping you up. I kept half of that promise for 11 years. I opened the door. The Georgia night came in warm and loud with crickets. You just released me from the other half. I left them in the echoing foyer with the dessert plates and the friends who'd come to watch a widow get put in her place and had, instead, watched something they didn't have a word for. I drove home in the Camry with the epoxy cup holder. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying over Caleb's truck in the spring. I made tea. I got out the green ledger. And for the first time in 11 years, I closed it. And I put it on the high shelf. And I let myself feel how tired my arms had been the whole time. The phone started ringing at 7:51 the next morning. I let it ring. I knew Harold. He was a good man and a careful one, and I knew exactly how the morning was going to go, because I'd planned it that way months ago, in the quiet part of myself that had known this was coming long before Brooke opened her mouth. When Loretta had her stroke, I'd done a thing I hadn't told anyone. I'd sat down with Harold and a real estate planning attorney named Diane Okafor, a sharp, kind woman who'd handled veterans' families for 30 years, and I'd put it all in writing. Not just the trust. A complete accounting. 11 years, every transfer, every invisible rescue, every dollar, cross-referenced to my green ledger, notarized, sealed, and held in Diane's office with one instruction. If I ever told her the support was ending, she was to send a single registered letter to Wesley Calloway and to make herself available to explain it. I'd done it the way I did everything, carefully, boringly, with records. I'd half hoped I'd never need it. People will surprise you, Caleb used to say. He was usually right. He just wasn't right about Wesley. The registered letter reached Wesley's house 3 days later. I know the exact day because Diane called to tell me he'd phoned her office 4 times before lunch. What was in the letter wasn't a demand. I want to be clear about that, because this is the part where a lesser version of this story turns into revenge. And it wasn't revenge. The letter didn't ask for the $341,000 back. It couldn't have. It was a gift, freely given with no expectation, and Diane had structured it precisely so that no one could ever claim I'd been buying anything. The letter simply ended the fiction. It laid out in Diane's flat legal prose that the Mranespexter's recall of 2014 had been a private payment, that the Veterans' Scholarship did not exist and never had, that the hospital charity adjustment of 2018 had been funded by a private trust, that the deferred lease program Wesley's landlord had so generously offered had in fact been Ruth Calloway paying his rent, that Loretta Calloway's room at Wisteria Gardens, the good room, the one with the garden, was being vacated for the shared Medicaid wing at the end of the month, unless the family could find $9,000 because the woman who'd been quietly paying for it had stopped. And it included, as an attachment, a single photocopied page from my ledger. Diane's idea. She said people don't believe numbers until they see them in someone's handwriting. The page she chose was from October 2018. 3 lines. Brooke's hospital bill, $81,200, and in my handwriting, in the margin, the note I'd written to myself that night so I'd remember why I was doing it. For Caleb. So she keeps her pride. Brooke read that line. Wesley read that line. The woman she'd called brave for keeping, that haircut, the dowdy widow, she'd voted off the island to impress her friends, had stood in an emergency room hallway in 2018 and quietly absorbed $81,000 of Brooke's medical debt and written in the margin that she'd done it to protect Brooke's pride. I'm told Brooke didn't speak for 2 days. I don't know if that's true. I wasn't there, and I'd stopped attending. Here's where I have to tell you about the part that I didn't plan, the part that I think Caleb would have liked best, because it had nothing to do with money. It was about who knew. In a small town in Georgia, things travel. Not the way Brooke would have wanted them to travel, in a controlled little narrative she could shape. They traveled the way truth travels, which is sideways and slow and impossible to stop. The contractor who'd fixed Loretta's roof in 2014, he was still around, still working, And when the recall story finally collapsed, he told people the truth, because he was tired of being part of a lie he'd been paid $200 to keep. He told them about the widow who'd insisted on anonymity. The landlord told someone. Harold, bound by confidentiality on the specifics but not on the shape of the thing, said only this when a mutual friend asked. There are people in this town who give with their whole chest and make sure nobody ever knows. Ruth Calloway is the quietest one I've met. That was all. It was enough. And the nurses at Wisteria Gardens, they'd known all along. They were the only ones who had. Because every single Sunday for 2 years, while the family that couldn't make it work stayed home, a woman in one of the cardigans drove 40 minutes each way to sit with a stroke patient who couldn't always remember her name, and read to her, and did the small, undignified care work that nobody wants to do, and never signed the guest book, and never told a soul. Now I'll bring Earl back, the way I promised I would. When the recall story finally fell apart, and the town started turning it over, somebody, I never learned who, said something dismissive at the VFW hall, the kind of thing small towns say to make a strange truth smaller. Something like, well, she had government money. Easy to be generous on a fat pension. It's not like she did anything. Earl Tuck was 81 years old by then, and didn't get out of his chair fast for anybody. He got out of it for that. I wasn't there. I heard it from 3 different people, and the versions agree, which is how you know it's true. Stood up, slow, with the bad hip, and he waited until the room was quiet, the way master sergeants know how to make a room quiet without raising their voice, and he said this. I've had it repeated to me enough times that I trust the shape of it. I served 30 years in supply. You want to call that nothing? You go ahead. You've been calling it nothing your whole life. Let me tell you what supply is. Supply is the reason your son came home. Supply is the blood that's the right type, and the boots that fit, and the bullets that are there when the loud men finally need them. The loud men get the medals. The supply people get the jokes. And I have buried more loud men than I can count, and every one of them ate because somebody quiet made sure they ate. He pointed his cane, I'm told, in the general direction of my side of town. That woman carried that whole sorry family for 11 years and let them spit on her to keep their pride intact, because her husband, a better man than anybody in this room, asked her to with his dying breath. You want to know what honor looks like? It doesn't look like a uniform. It looks like a 54-year-old widow in a wobbly chair paying for the room and sitting in the cheap seat, and not one of you noticed until the money stopped. So don't you dare call it nothing. It's the only something in the whole story. Then he sat back down and finished his beer, and according to all 3 witnesses, nobody said another word about easy pensions. I went and saw him after I heard. I brought him a 6-pack of the cheap beer he liked, and we sat on his porch and didn't talk much, the way supply people don't. At the end I said, You didn't have to do that, Earl. He said, Course I did. You think I was going to let them rewrite it? I'm the last witness, Ruthie. I was there at the courthouse, and I was there at the funeral, and I'll be there at whatever comes next. Somebody has to remember it right. He looked at his dog. Caleb made me a witness 30 years ago and never let me off the hook. I'm not letting you off yours either. You're going to let people see you now. That's an order. It was the first order anyone had given me in a long time, and the first I'd wanted to obey. That's the educational part, if you want one, though I distrust stories that announce their own lessons. So I'll just tell you what I learned, and you can decide if it's worth anything. Respect is not a thing you demand at a dinner table. It is not a thing you earn by being loud, or by having a watch, or by saying the cruelest true-sounding thing in the room, and watching people laugh. Brooke spent 11 years performing superiority over a woman who was, that entire time, the only reason Brooke's superiority had a roof over its head. The performance felt like power. It was the opposite of power. Real power is the capacity to lift something without needing anyone to see you strain. And here is the harder lesson, the one that cost me more to learn than the $41,000. Because money I had and pride I had to give up. Dignity that depends on no one knowing is a noble thing, but it is also a trap. I let them disrespect me for 11 years because I'd confused silence with virtue. I thought keeping the secret made me good. Some of it did, but some of it just made me complicit in my own diminishment. Caleb asked me to protect their pride. He never asked me to surrender mine. I added that part myself, And it took a cruel woman at a birthday dinner to show me the difference. You can carry someone without letting them put their boot on your neck. I wish I'd learned that at year 2 instead of year 11. The head nurse at Wisteria Gardens, a woman named Patrice, who'd worked memory care for 20 years and seen every kind of family there is, put it more plainly than I ever could. Near the end of all this, she said something I've kept like a stone in my pocket. Honey, I've watched 100 rich families park their mamas here and visit twice a year to feel less guilty. You're the only person I've ever seen pay for the good and sit in the cheap chair. Then she went back to her rounds, because that's what people who actually carry things do. They don't linger on the line. They've got somewhere to be now. The part you've been waiting for, what happened to them? I'd like to tell you. Brooke got her comeuppance in some grand cinematic way. The truth is quieter and I think truer. The room at Wisteria Gardens was the first real consequence. The family had 30 days to come up with $9,000 a month or move Loretta to the Medicaid wing. Clean, adequate, but shared, loud, no garden. For the first time, the cost of Loretta's care was visible, and it landed where it had always actually been, on her son. Wesley sold the boat, then the watch. Then, when the math still didn't work, the big house with the echoing foyer went on the market, because it turned out that a home theater business that had been quietly propped up for a decade could not, in fact, support a $9,000 a month nursing bill on its own. The propping had hidden the truth. The truth had been waiting the whole time. I could have kept paying. I want you to know that I thought about it. Lying awake at 3 a.m., the way you do. Loretta hadn't done anything to me, she'd just looked away, which is its own kind of harm, but a smaller one. For a few nights I almost called Diane and told her to turn it all back on, quietly, the way I'd always done it. And then I thought about what turning it back on would teach. It would teach Wesley that the floor was infinite. It would teach Brooke that cruelty has no cost. It would teach Tyler, the boy I'd put through private school, who'd grown into a young man who looked at me like furniture, that some people simply exist to absorb the consequences that belong to others. So I did the thing that was harder than paying, and harder than walking away. I called Diane and I set up a new instrument, a direct, dedicated, irrevocable trust for Loretta's care, and only Loretta's care, administered by Diane, untouchable by Wesley, that would pay for the good room at Wisteria Gardens for the rest of Loretta's life. For her, not for them. The difference matters. Under the old system, my money flowed through the family and propped up their whole inflated life. And they got to keep their pride and their boat and their contempt. Under the new one, the money goes straight to a stroke patient's care, and nowhere else. Wesley can't borrow against it. Brooke can't redecorate with it. The contempt no longer comes with a subsidy. Wesley found out about the trust the way he found out about everything in the end. From Diane, in a flat letter. I'm told he sat in her office and cried. Not the performative kind. The other kind. The kind that comes when a man finally sees the actual shape of his life, and understands that the thing he treated as nothing was the only thing holding it up. He wrote me a letter, handwritten, which I'll admit surprised me. I have it still, I won't read you all of it, because some of it was his to say and mine to keep, but there was one part. I keep thinking about the coffee cup, he wrote. That last dinner. I set it down and I didn't say anything, and I've set that cup down 1,000 times in my head since, and every time I tell myself this is the time I stand up, and every time I don't, because it already happened, and you can't go back and be brave in a memory. Caleb would have stood up. Caleb would have stood up for you the first time. 11 years ago. The first time Brooke said something and I let it go because letting things go was easier, and you never seemed to mind, and I told myself you didn't mind. I knew you minded. I just preferred not knowing. He came to see me eventually. Showed up at my door on a Sunday. He'd learned from Patrice that Sunday was the day I drove to Wisteria Gardens. And he'd worked out that if he came early, he'd catch me before I left. He stood on my porch, a 51-year-old man who'd lost the house and the boat and the watch and the wife. Brooke left when the money did, which told us both everything we needed to know about Brooke. And he held a cup of gas station coffee, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. I'm not here for money, he said first, fast, like he'd practiced it. I want to be clear. I'm not here for money, Diane explained the trust. I think it's right. I think it's more than I deserve, what you're doing for Mom. I waited. I'd gotten good at waiting. I came to say I'm sorry, he said. And I know that's worth nothing. I know sorry is the cheapest word there is when you've spent 11 years not using it. But Caleb asked you to take care of us. And you did. And we treated you like. His voice went. And he stopped. And he started again. He asked you to carry us. He never asked anybody to carry you. I should have been carrying you. That was supposed to be my job. He was my brother. He stood there a while after that, not crying exactly, just leaking, the way men cry when they've spent 50 years being taught not to. The gas station coffee was going cold in his hand, and he kept not drinking it. You know what I keep coming back to? He said. It's not even the money. The money I can't get my head around, it's too big, it's like a number on the moon. It's smaller than that. It's the cake. At the dinner, the sheet cake from Dempsey's. Brooke ordered it and I paid for it on my card and felt good about myself, felt like a provider, and it turns out you paid for it. You paid for the cake at the dinner where we threw you out. You bought the cake we ate while we told you to leave. He laughed, but it was a terrible laugh. Who does that? Who buys the cake at her own? He couldn't finish it. He put the heel of his hand against his eyes. I let him stand there. I'd learned over 11 years that the kindest thing you can do for a person who's finally seeing themselves is to not rush them through it. The seeing is the whole point. You don't want to interrupt the one useful thing that's ever going to happen to them. I don't want anything, he said again, when he could. I want to be useful. I don't know how. I never learned how. Caleb knew how, and I spent my whole life thinking he was a sucker for it, and now I'm 51, and I've got a rented room and a job I had at 23, and I'd trade every year of being right about him to have one more Tuesday, where he hauls Doyle's garbage cans, and I help instead of watching from the window. I hadn't told him about Doyle's garbage cans. He remembered it on his own. That's when I knew something in him had actually turned over, because the careless version of Wesley didn't have access to memories like that. They'd been there the whole time, under the noise. The noise had just finally stopped. And here's the thing about timing, the thing this whole story turns on. He meant it. I could see he meant it. Standing on my porch with his cheap coffee, Wesley Calloway was, for the first time in his life, the man his brother had always hoped he'd become. 11 years too late. I didn't slam the door in his face. I'm not built that way, and Caleb wouldn't have wanted it. And besides, a slam door is just another kind of performance, and I was done performing. I let him say his piece. I told him I forgave him, and I mostly meant it, because carrying 11 years of resentment is just another pack, and I was tired of packs. But I didn't invite him in. There's a difference between forgiveness and restoration, and it took me 54 years to learn it. You can forgive someone completely and still not hand them back the keys to the part of your they burned down. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself to set down the weight. Restoration is something you do for the relationship, and it requires the other person to have been trustworthy for long enough that you can believe in the new version. Wesley had been sorry for 3 weeks. He'd been careless for 11 years. The math wasn't there yet. It might get there, it might not. But you don't rebuild a bridge on the same afternoon the river finally goes down. Go see your mother, I told him, on the porch. It's Sunday. She likes Sundays. Somebody usually comes on Sundays. I didn't say it was me. He worked it out anyway, from the cardigan, I think, or from the way I had my keys already in my hand. His face did a complicated thing. You go every week, he said, all this time. I made a promise, I said. I let him follow me there that once. We sat with Loretta in the good room, with the garden view, on either side of her bed. And she was having a clear day, one of the rare ones. And she looked at her son, and then at me, and she said, my boys always brought their wives around. Caleb married up. Caleb always did know quality. She'd gotten confused about who I was. She thought I was newly arrived. She patted my hand and told me to take good care of her, Caleb. He was a good boy. He fixed things. I told her I would. Wesley cried again, quietly, looking out at the garden I'd been paying for, and for once in his life he didn't try to hide it, and for once in his life nobody put a hand on his arm to make him stop. That's most of the story. I'll tell you the small thing that ends it, because the big things are over, and the small thing is the one I think about. About a month after that Sunday, a package came to my door. No note inside, which I appreciated, because a note would have been a performance, and Wesley had finally learned the difference. It was a truck. Not the truck. Caleb's old Ford was gone, sold in the spring to make a nursing payment, and you can't unsell a thing like that. But Wesley had found a 1991 F-150, same year, same model, same color. The ugly factory blue Caleb had loved and everyone else had hated, and he'd had it restored. Quietly, over weeks, paying for it himself from a job he'd taken, installing home theaters again, but as an employee now, an hourly man, the empire gone. He'd carried something. For someone. Without taking the credit. He'd learned the one thing his brother had been trying to teach him at that barbecue reception in 1992. The thing it took, lose everything to finally understand. Get there however you get there, little brother. Just don't forget who carried you on the way. I start the truck up once a month, just to hear it run. It's loud and it's ugly, and it idles rough, and I love it more than almost anything I own. When I turn the key, I think about Caleb, and I think about the 11 years, and I think about the difference between being invisible and being quiet, because they are not the same thing, and I spent too long mistaking one for the other. Quiet is a choice you make from strength. Invisible is a thing you let other people do to you. I'm done being invisible. I'm keeping the quiet. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from, and whether there's someone in your own life who carries more than anyone sees. The people holding things up are almost never the loudest ones in the room. Sometimes they're at the end of the table, in the wobbly chair, in the same 2 cardigans, waiting 11 years for one person to simply say thank you. And if it never comes, if the thank you never comes, let me tell you what I learned since you've stayed with me this long. You don't carry people because they'll thank you. You carry them because somebody has to, and you're the one who knows how. But you carry them standing up. You carry them with your pride intact. And the day someone tries to convince you that your silence is the same thing as your worthlessness, you set down the pack and you let them feel exactly how heavy it always was. If stories about quiet strength and the people the world overlooks mean something to you, stay with me. There are more of them waiting, and the next one's already taking shape. A note before you go. The financial instruments in this story: the private grantor trust, the irrevocable care trust, the notarized accounting held with an estate attorney, are real tools that elder law and estate attorneys use every day across the United States to protect both the people who give and the people who receive. Laws differ from state to state, and what works in Georgia may be structured very differently where you live. If anything here made you think about your own family, an aging parent, a relative quietly going under, money flowing in a direction nobody talks about, please don't act on what you heard in a story or in a comment section. Sit down with a licensed estate or elder law attorney in the state where your family lives. If you're worried someone older is being financially pressured or taken advantage of, the National Council on Aging runs a free helpline at 1-800-677-111-SUNG-STEE. I'm not a lawyer, and nothing here is legal advice. I'm just someone who believes the people holding families together deserve to be seen. And that being seen, finally, should never have to cost them the thing it cost Ruth.